today's movie was Phone Call from a Stranger from 1952. It stars Gary Merrill, Shelley Winters, Michael Rennie, Keenan Wynn, and Bette Davis. It was directed by Gene Negulesco with a script by Nunnally Johnson. The story follows attorney David Trask, who walks out on his unfaithful wife and gets on a plane to Los Angeles. During the flight, he befriends 3 of his fellow passengers. However, after the plane crashes and he is one of the only survivors, he decides to visit the families of his 3 deceased acquaintances from the plane and try to resolve the unfinished business that each one of them had with their families. All the elements are in place to make Phone Call from a Stranger a great movie. It's got a really strong cast of top performers, a great scriptwriter, Nunnally Johnson, who wrote The Woman in the Window and so many other great movies, dependable director, and also a great score from Franz Waxman. So why does the film feel so unsatisfying? For me, a lot of the problem with the film is the tone. It can't ever really seem to settle into the proper tone for what the story is about. It's a very serious subject and it's a tense drama at times, but it kind of wavers uneasily between that tense drama and attempts at a broad comedy. Particularly the scenes about Shelley Winters and the kind of flashback fantasy falls into this very broad comedy that sits so uneasily within the rest of the film. It's an odd and awkward choice because the film is mostly serious in tone and does delve into some quite heavy moral questions. The other thing I felt when I was watching the film is that it feels kind of unstructured and too loosely plotted, where it should have been more tightly structured and more fast-paced. The film also felt a bit long to me, with not enough going on. And this is especially true in the first sections of the film leading up to the crash. It just has a leisurely pace, which I found a little bit frustrating. I generally love a portmanteau style film, an anthology film with several stories in it. And I love a lot of those British portmanteau films like Dead of Night and The House That Dripped Blood and all those great horror portmanteaus. The odd thing here is that Gene Negulesco, who is the director of the film, actually directed the best segment in the American portmanteau film O. Henry's Full House. I don't know if you remember that one, the One Leaf Left segment, I think it was called. And a very, very memorable segment in a strong film. But this film just doesn't really have the cohesiveness and the forward momentum that those other portmanteau films have, and it feels like a bit of a mess at times, unfortunately. But it is a matter of taste. I watched this with my mum, and she really enjoyed it. So maybe it depends on the expectations that you have going into it, on how much you'll enjoy it. I suppose when I saw the cast and the names associated with it, I was expecting just something a bit stronger, and I was just unsatisfied, I guess. Having said that, Phone Call from a Stranger does have some good elements in it, certainly. Gary Merrill, as the star of the film, gives a very strong performance, and he has a really beautiful speaking voice, which I don't really remember noticing that much before, but I really enjoyed his performance in this role. The segment involving Michael Rennie's flashback is the strongest segment for my money. I always enjoy seeing Michael Rennie, and his segment was very compelling, and perhaps it needed to be more like that throughout the rest of the film. What made his segment so memorable also is the car crash sequence, which is handled in a very thrilling and shocking way. The section with the plane crash was also really well executed and startling. Another thing to enjoy in the film is its really solid supporting cast. I particularly enjoyed seeing Beatrice Straight, who I also saw and enjoyed in Patterns, and you might also remember her from Poltergeist sometime later. She is really good as Michael Rennie's wife, who's holding a terrible secret. I also very much enjoyed the supporting performance of Evelyn Varden as the really mean vaudeville mama to Shelley Winters. She's a favourite of mine from her performance in The Bad Seed, and it was really nice to see her in a completely different role in this film. I don't know if the strength of the cast of Phone Call from a Stranger is also part of what makes it unsatisfying, paradoxically, because all the stars are so good in it, and it's kind of frustrating that we don't get to see more of all of them, but we can't, of course. But yeah, it's just one of those tricky films where, you know, it's got so many great things in it, but it never really reaches, I think, the potential of what it could have been or should have been. To sum up, I would say that Phone Call from a Stranger is not unenjoyable, but for me it was a bit of an unsatisfying film. See it as a curiosity, certainly, for its cast. It really is a very good cast, as I said. Also interesting for the fact that Bette Davis appears in a small role, but it's a memorable role and it's very different from the kind of roles that I've seen her playing before. Also interesting because, of course, Bette Davis was married to Gary Merrill, so it's always fascinating to see them on screen together. If you come to Phone Call from a Stranger with moderate expectations, I think there are still plenty of things you'd find to enjoy in it, but I don't know that I would rush to see it again. If you have any thoughts about Phone Call from a Stranger, I'd be interested to hear them. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.